Good morning, y'all. How's everybody doing? Good. It's good to see y'all. Yeah, get you some Kleenex. There you go. So, before we get started this morning, I would be remiss if I did not say happy birthday to my firstborn, who turns 18 today. Don't cheer for that. Don't cheer for that. It's not a happy thing. I think we have a picture. Do we have a picture? There it is. This was 14 years ago today that picture was taken. She was not happy to be sharing that ice cream cone with me, I can tell you that. So I did something very ill-advised last night, thinking about her 18th birthday. I went digging through her baby pictures. No, not a good call. Any girl dads here, any dads of girls, don't do it. Do not do it. Unless you have a supportive person or some kind of support animal with you. I did, actually. My dog laid her head up against me because she knew I was kind of sad about it. But happy birthday, Aunt Grace. We love you. We're so glad you're on the earth. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to be starting a series on the prophet Jonah today. No cheers for that? Okay, good. Anna Grace got all the cheers. So we're going to just jump right in and read from Jonah chapter 1, which is a long reading. Y'all just kind of stay with me. And then I'm going to read through some of my notes today, and we'll kind of see what happens. We're going to start by reading Jonah chapter 1. You can turn there in your Bibles, but the words will also be up on the screen. If you have your Bible and you're looking for Jonah, Jonah's kind of hard to find because Jonah's part of the minor prophets or the 12 prophets. But there's a trick to finding the book of Jonah that makes it really easy, okay? It's right after the book of Obadiah. It was a joke. It was a joke. Okay, reading from Jonah chapter 1. The Lord's word came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their evil has come to my attention. So Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord. He went down to Jaffa and found a ship headed for Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to go with them to Tarshish, away from the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, so that there was a great storm upon the sea. The ship looked like it might be broken to pieces. The sailors were terrified, and each one cried out to his own God. They hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to make it lighter. Let me just say this real quick. What I like about this translation is how many times it uses the word hurled. Now Jonah had gone down into the hold of the vessel to lie down and was deep in sleep. The ship's officer came and said to him, "How can you possibly be sleeping so deeply? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps the God will give some thought to us, so that we won't perish." Meanwhile, the sailors said to each other, "Come on, let's cast lots, so that we might learn who is to blame for this evil that is happening to us." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, "Tell us, since you're the cause of this evil happening to us, what do you do? Where are you from? What's your country? And of what people are you?" Jonah said to them, "I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were terrified and said to him, "What have you done?" The men knew that Jonah was fleeing from the Lord because he had told them. They said to him, "What will we do about you so that the sea will become calm around us?" The sea was continuing to rage. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. The sea will become calm around you, for I know it's my fault that this great storm has come upon you." The men rowed to reach dry land, but they could not manage it because the sea continued to rage against them. So they called upon the Lord, saying, Please, Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not blame us for innocent blood. You are the Lord, and whatever you want, you can do. Then they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased its raging. The men worshiped the Lord with a profound reverence. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made solemn promises. Verse 17, meanwhile, the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Y'all give yourselves a hand for sitting through that whole reading. Well, give me a hand for reading all of that. Thank you, thank you. So that's Jonah. There will be more hurling to come in the book of Jonah. That's all the hurling for today. I would like for us to spend the next few minutes looking into the context of this book, because we know that context is always important. But there are times and certain stories, like the story of Jonah, in which context is absolutely vital. In order for us to understand what's going on with Jonah, we sort of need to understand the context that he's living in. So what do we know about Jonah? We know that Jonah was a real person, y'all say real person, who was also mentioned briefly in the book of 2 Kings. And not only that, he is mentioned by Jesus, not once, but twice. Jesus mentions Jonah, and in Luke chapter 11, y'all can check on this later, Luke chapter 11, verse 32, Jesus not only talks about Jonah, but he specifically talks about Jonah's ministry to Nineveh. So this is how we know Jonah was a real person who had a real ministry to the people of Nineveh. Now, according to my estimations, there are at least 26 of y'all who are wondering, but did this really happen? I won't make you raise your hand. But when we hear this story, there is something in us, right, that's like, did this really happen? And if y'all are beyond that, congratulations. But for most of us, that's a thought. And I want to say that that's an okay thought to have. Okay? You have free permission to have that thought. First, I got to be straight with you. I wasn't there when this happened. Therefore, I cannot say definitively, yes, it happened. Part of what makes this story difficult to take literally is the fact that it is structured. It really is structured exactly like a folktale. The way that it's broken down, the way that it's told like a folktale. Plus, it has all these fantastical elements, such as a giant fish swallowing Jonah whole. Okay? So all these things kind of come together to make us think maybe this is not a literal story. But let me just sprinkle this in there, okay? Just because it's structured like a folktale doesn't mean that it's not true. What it could very well mean is this, and probably does mean is this, that this story existed as part of an oral tradition for a long, long time before it was ever written down. So that by the time they took the time and had the time and the space to actually put this story in writing, it had evolved and it had been edited down so that it was really like a perfect story. And y'all, this is, like, for all other things, there are so many, like, lessons, and this is revelation, this is God's word. But this is a perfect story in so many ways. There's so many nuances and complexities that go on throughout the 4 chapters of this story that tells us that probably it existed in an oral tradition for a long time before it was ever put in writing. Okay? So I can't speak for you, but I am comfortable with the assumption that this story actually happened. For 2 reasons. 1, I've lived long enough to see some really weird things. And this is what's true about getting older, y'all. And I am like a skeptical person. The older that I get, the less trouble I have believing the unbelievable. Because I've seen some stuff. I've never seen a person swallowed by a fish. I've never seen a person vomited up by a fish. Never seen any of that. But I've seen some things. Is this my new microphone? Thank you. Thank you. I've seen enough to say crazier things have happened. And the second reason is this. Again, Jesus himself. So not only is Jonah mentioned in 2 Kings, but Jesus himself refers to Jonah's ministry to Nineveh as an historical event. Okay? So because of those two things, I'm good. I'm good operating under the assumption that this is not only a perfect story and not only a rich story that has tons of insights, because it is that, but that it is also rooted in a historical event. Everybody good with that? Okay. So that's basically all we know about Jonah. What do we know about Nineveh, this place to which Jonah is called? Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. And Assyria was a dominant military power and the chief military threat to the nation of Israel. That's important, y'all. So Jonah's hatred of Nineveh is rooted in his loyalty to Israel. It wasn't so much that Jonah... Anybody grow up on VeggieTales? Come on. Do y'all remember the VeggieTales story? Wasn't like the people from Nineveh would slap you in the face with a fish or something like that? I'm not saying that didn't happen, but Jonah really, his dread and his refusal to go to Nineveh wasn't rooted in him wanting to preserve himself. He was wanting to preserve his people. And this, Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, and Assyria is the arch enemy of the people of Israel. The chief military threat of the people of Israel. Jonah doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to set foot there. He doesn't want to think about them. He certainly doesn't want to do anything that might help them. Okay? I believe we have a map. Do we have a map? There we go. Okay, so you can see Nineveh on the map. So this is where Jonah is, somewhere in here. He's in the northern, he's in Israel, which is in the northern part. And here's Nineveh. This is what's really interesting, y'all, is that what does Jonah do when God calls him? He gets on a boat. Bro, you ain't got to get on a boat to go to Nineveh. So, like, he took a whole different means of transportation. This is a land route. Now, at some point, he's going to have to, like, he's going to have to cross the Tigris River and things like that and the Euphrates, but he's not going to have to get out here in the Mediterranean Sea, which is what he does. So we see the close proximity of Nineveh to Assyria. So this is why Jonah doesn't want to go there. Primarily, he doesn't want to go there because he loves his people and he's loyal to them. The Ninevites were also known for their cruelty, beyond just slapping people in the face with a fish. Now, I struggled with like how graphic to get. And I'm going to do y'all a favor. I'm going to go on the less graphic end of this. Some of the things that the Ninevites were known to do, they were known for being cruel. They were known to impale, decapitate, and even fillet their enemies. There's even a story about how the Ninevites, so again, they're there on the Tigris River. So if you're on the Tigris River, you're floating up to the gates of the city of Nineveh, and that they would actually take the skulls of their captives and stack them in pyramids at their gates so that people would be freaked out. That would freak me out. I keep on floating on the Tigris River. I'm past them. But these are the kinds of things that Nineveh was known for. They were known for being cruel. And this makes sense because God says to Jonah, their wickedness has come before me. Sacrificing children was part of their pagan worship. So between his loyalty to Israel and the cruelty of the Ninevites, we get some sense of why Jonah doesn't want to go there. And here's what I think needs to happen, y'all, over the next few weeks in order for us to like really get what God is trying to tell us through this story. At some point, we have got to attain a certain level of empathy with Jonah. And not say, well, look at Jonah and judge him, but say, dude, I understand. I wouldn't want to do that either. I totally get why he did what he did. So now that we've gotten some idea about the context of this story, I want for us to spend most of the rest of our time looking at a couple of overarching themes of this story. Anybody else hot? I'm hot. We're going to be all right, though. We're going to be all right. I feel like T.D. Jakes up here. I'm going to start dabbing my forehead. Sorry. This is the only similarity between me and T.D. Jakes. I'm pretty sure. Okay, so there are some overarching themes that run through the story of Jonah. Next week, Janika is going to take us into chapter 2, and then I'll be back to cover chapter 3 and 4 in the 2 weeks after that. But these themes run through all of these chapters, run through the whole story, and kind of undergird, so not just overarching, but kind of undergirding elements of this story. The first is this: the unconditional presence of Yahweh. And these are just a couple of very simple things that I feel that God has given me. This is what God has given me permission to do today, is just share a couple of very simple things and maybe drive those things home a little bit. The unconditional presence of Yahweh. And we see that even in this first chapter. Didn't Spencer do a great job last week breaking down the difference between God's presence, God's omnipresence, and God's manifest presence? Didn't Spencer do a great job? He did. In fact, Spencer did a great job. The whole message was great. It didn't feel like 50 minutes, bro. To be clear, it was 50 minutes, but it did not feel like 50 minutes. But when he got into that and really explicating the difference between God's, we could say, omnipresence or his general presence and his manifest presence, and then knowing we're going into Jonah, which touches on this very thing, I thought this is a great opportunity to kind of pick up where he left off and press into that a little bit more. Okay, so here we go. Yahweh's presence is everywhere. Yes? His manifest presence is potentially everywhere. Yes? So let's start off with Yahweh's presence is everywhere. Because that's something we can say, oh yeah, I know that, and skip right past it. But y'all really, really anchor yourself deeply in what that means. Yahweh's presence is an ontological necessity for us. What that means is this: ontology is the science of being. So when I say Yahweh's presence is an ontological necessity for us, what I mean is our being is dependent upon his presence. He is the source and sustainer of all existence. Therefore, all living things are dependent upon his presence. In short, we only exist because he exists. And because he has freely chosen, nobody made him do it, but he has freely chosen to lend his existence to us. You don't have any existence that is yours. The existence that you have is Yahweh's existence that he is allowing you to partake of. Have you ever wondered if God was there? If you're anything like me, you've had some long, dark, lonely nights. You're awake. It's 2:39 in the morning. All kinds of things are running through your mind. Everybody else is asleep. Feels like the whole world is asleep but you, and you wonder if God is there. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but I have. The next time you're there, rest assured, if God weren't there, you wouldn't be there either. Your presence is proof of his presence because your presence depends upon his presence. If God weren't there, you wouldn't be there. I have a quote to share by a man named Joseph the Hesychast. Y'all say Hesychast. Look at Joseph, man. Okay, so hesychasm just means silent prayer. So Joseph the Hesychast, I guess, is just somebody who really liked to pray in silence. But here's what he says. God is everywhere. There is no place God is not. You cry out to him, where are you, God? And he answers, I am present, my child. I am always beside you, inside, outside, above and below. Wherever you turn, everything shouts God. God is everywhere, and everything that lives derives its life, its existence from the unconditional, general, or omnipresence of God. Everybody good with that? But just because God is present doesn't mean that we are aware of his presence. In fact, I would say, y'all, that most of the time we are not consciously aware of his presence. But when the presence of God is made palpable, when the presence of God becomes thick and undeniable, we call that his manifest presence. There's a direct connection between his manifest presence and our awareness and our worship. His manifest presence causes us to become aware, and it causes us to worship him, but it can also work the other way. Our awareness of him and our worship of him also invites his manifest presence. Now that y'all got a little primer on ontology, let's get back to Jonah. Here's where we kind of come back to the story of Jonah. In verse 3, it says that Jonah sought to, quote, flee from the presence of Yahweh, or flee from the presence of the Lord, which is actually not a great translation. What it literally says in the Hebrew is that Jonah sought to flee from the face of the Lord. And in the Hebrew, whenever we see that word, the face of the Lord, that denotes the manifest presence of the Lord. Not just the general presence, not just his omnipresence, but his manifest, his felt, his thick, his undeniable presence. That's what Jonah is trying to flee from. He's trying to flee from the face of Yahweh. Jonah knows that he can't flee from the general presence of God. He knows that. He's not dumb. He's a lot of things, but he's not dumb. He even tells these sailors on the boat, hey man, I serve Yahweh. I serve the Lord, the God of the heavens, the one who made the land and the sea. So he understands that there's really nowhere he can go to fully escape from the general presence of Yahweh. But in the minds of the people of Israel, including Jonah, the face of God, the manifest presence of God was confined to Israel. Most specifically, the temple in Jerusalem. So this is why when Jonah gets, it's funny because when Jonah gets this call to go to Nineveh, it's like he could have just stayed there where he was. But he doesn't do that. He gets on a boat and tries to run away. Why? Because he's trying to get away from Yahweh's face, which he assumes exists only in the temple, only in the land of Israel. Certainly not out on the sea. And yet, here in Jonah 1, here goes Yahweh, manifesting himself to a boat full of pagans and to Jonah on the open sea. Who knew that Yahweh could even do that? Who knew that Yahweh would do that? But he does. He makes himself manifest, and we see that. We'll talk a little bit about it later, but we see that because the sailor's response is to drop everything and worship him. It says in profound reverence. They experience the manifest presence of God going in the opposite direction of Jerusalem out on the raging sea. God's presence is everywhere. Again, that means his manifest presence is potentially everywhere. when it comes to having an encounter with Yahweh. And this is what we're talking about when we say we experience the manifest presence. We're always really having an encounter with him, aren't we? Because Psalms makes clear that we can't really escape him or avoid him. But when we say we had an encounter with Yahweh, this is what we mean. We came in contact with his manifest presence. And when it comes to having an encounter with Yahweh, no corner of the cosmos is off limits. There is nowhere that doesn't belong to him. There is no place that is not sustained by his presence. Therefore, his face can show up anywhere. Here's another quote. This is from a man by the name of A.W. Tozer. That's a cool picture of A.W. Tozer, isn't it? And here he makes this distinction between the presence and the manifest presence. The presence and the manifest presence are not the same. God is here even when we are wholly unaware of it. He is manifest only as we become aware of his presence. So again, that awareness, the manifestation is contingent upon our awareness. If we cooperate with him in loving obedience, God will manifest himself to us, and that manifestation will be the difference between a nominal Christian life and a life radiant with the light of his face. Jonah needed to learn a lesson. And more than that, the people of Israel needed to learn this lesson. And often, y'all, the prophets, they didn't really sign up for this. The prophets are not just preachers, they're also object lessons. God will use the prophet and put the prophet through something to teach the people something. They signed up for that. They didn't know. It was in the fine print. This is what Yahweh does. And he's teaching them that, y'all, my presence is not, thank you for building me a house, okay? But my presence is not confined to that house. My presence is not confined just to the nation of Israel. The second overarching kind of undergirding theme is not only the unconditional presence of Yahweh, but the universal love of Yahweh. The universal love of Yahweh. Because God had chosen the nation of Israel, they had a tendency to take his love for granted, often forgetting that Yahweh had chosen them as a means of blessing all nations, as a means of showing his love to all nations. And guess what? That includes Assyria, their enemies. Assumptions can be dangerous, can they not? I like to make assumptions. I never really learned my lesson. I continue to make assumptions and learn the hard way. Any assumption has the potential to be a dangerous assumption, but no assumption is more dangerous than the assumption of divine favor. To just assume, especially if there's any kind of dispute, especially if there's any kind of disagreement, to just assume that God is on your side. That is the most dangerous assumption that you can make. And this is the assumption that, unfortunately, and all of us are prone to do this, but unfortunately the Israelites continue to make these assumptions. And as a prophet, Jonah is supposed to call them back to the roots of the covenant, which is we're not just blessed to hoard up Yahweh's blessings. He didn't just lavish his love upon us so that he could love us and we could keep it to ourselves. No, we're supposed to be a means of blessing all nations. But again and again, they take his love for granted. They take his favor for granted and assume that he is on their side. You can assume God loves you, but don't assume he's on your side. Not to get too political. Now, Anna Grace doesn't like it when I get political, and it's her birthday, so I'm going to try to behave myself and not get too political. I'm just going to say this, okay? And y'all can come to whatever conclusions you want to. No nation can assume that the favor of God and the love of God is theirs by right. No nation can assume that. And in case you didn't connect the dots, that includes Israel. Even Israel cannot make that assumption. The United States can't make that assumption. No nation can make that assumption. No nation is worthy of blind allegiance. Allegiance, yes, but not blind allegiance. Blind allegiance to a single nation or a single people group or a single political party causes us to lose touch with the universal love of Yahweh. That doesn't mean we can't have favorites. That doesn't mean we can't support. That doesn't mean we can't show allegiance, but we cannot lose sight of the universal love of Yahweh, y'all. We can experience His love. But we cannot forget that there's other people who are completely different than us, who believe different things, who live a different way, and He loves them. His love shines on them in the same way that it shines on us. It's not just for us to keep to ourselves. In conclusion, everybody good? You are quiet? I'm assuming you're just hot. Nobody's passed out. I just want to talk briefly about the storm and the fish that were sent by Yahweh in this first chapter. As tempting as it is to see these, did y'all grow up? Now, y'all grew up hearing the story of Jonah. If y'all grew up in church, y'all grew up hearing the story of Jonah. Did y'all assume that the storm and the fish, especially the fish, were like a way of God sticking it to Jonah? Like this is God's punishment for him not obeying His word. But as tempting as it is for us to see these as instruments of punishment sent by Yahweh as a consequence of Jonah's disobedience, they are actually instruments of His provision. Both the storm and the fish were sent to bring the prophet back into alignment with Yahweh's will, which, y'all, is the only place to be. So God is actually doing Jonah a huge favor by sending this storm and by sending this fish. And also, as sort of a side effect, I'm sure this was part of Yahweh's plan too, the storm is also the means by which these pagan sailors who have never even heard of Yahweh fall down on their face in profound reverence before Him and worship Him and make promises to Him. They got saved. Them sailors did. So the story of Jonah, y'all, eventually becomes a story of revival because, spoiler alert, we're going to see revival break out in the city of Nineveh. A tremendous revival following on the heels of the worst sermon ever preached. But revival broke out nonetheless. But before revival broke out in the streets of Nineveh, revival broke out on this boat. When these pagans who had never heard of the God of Israel encounter His manifest presence on the open waters and surrender to Him. I'm going to invite everyone to stand if you're able. And in just a few moments, just so I don't forget, just a few moments, we're going to open the altar. We're going to move into a time of prayer and communion together. And just know that the altar is open for you to come and pray. We'd love for you to come and pray. We have people to pray with you on the sides if you want someone to pray with you. And then there's communion stations on either side for you to partake of Holy Communion with us. But before we move into that time, I want to invite you to close your eyes and just reflect on these questions coming out of Jonah chapter 1. First, are you seeking to escape from the face of God? Only you know. Are you seeking to escape from the face of God? And listen, you may have a good reason, just like Jonah had a good reason. But let me tell you from experience, no matter how good your reason is, you will not succeed. Yahweh will not let you succeed in escaping His face. The sooner you turn back to God, the better. The sooner you turn back to God, the better. Second, who are your enemies? Nobody's making you say it out loud, so you can be honest. Who are your enemies? In this story, we see very clearly that the enemy of the people of Israel and the enemy, by extension, of Jonah are the people of Nineveh, the people of Assyria. Who are your enemies? Yes, we know that God calls us through Jesus to love our enemies. We know that. But the first and most important step, the step that we often skip over, is to first realize that God loves them whether you do or not. Whether you decide to love them or not, God has already decided to love them. And now the question remains for you: will you let God give you His love for your enemies?